Well, we're back on our bullshit. So, hello, I'm Mia Voss. That's Corbin.
Hi, folks. Corbin Knight-Dixon. I'm glad to be back, Mia.
I'm happy to be back with the other part of the Holy Trinity, HOLEY. If you didn't watch on, I believe it was Sunday night, I was here with Vanessa Richardson, aka V Richardson, who is out of Loudoun County. She's very, very involved. We had quite a lively conversation the other night, and so we thought we'd go for part two with Corbin to get even more lively on a couple different angles, right? All about Project 2025. See, I even feel like it's not even. I even skipped through the last 4 months of 2024. Jesus Christ, right?
Just jump in midstream.
Yeah, exactly. So, let's do a couple of disclaimers, warners, trigger warnings. One, if you're watching this without headphones or your kids are around, that's on you. You should know better. Plus, Corbin's here, so it's going to get really feisty. Two, this is about nuanced topics that go along with the election because we know there are a lot of disenfranchised, disengaged voters out there. Hopefully, in the last week or couple weeks, they've been really engaged. I saw somewhere that we have the highest number of voters registered. Did you catch that as well, Corbin?
I did. Yeah.
So, with that being said, we can't sit back on our laurels, but while we're having these important conversations with our friends and family members, and I hope that you are, first, we want to encourage you, to check your voter registration. As always, go to vote.org. You also go to bluevoterguide.org. I'll put those handy links in here. Also in vote.org, they have a whole list of early voting states, the early voting calendar. For instance, Alabama, continuing its complete back on its bullshit. Alabama does not have early voting. Shocker. But what I love about this link is that you can go to contact your local election official. Also, we know that Texas this week purged over 1 million voters out of their system for one reason or another. Greg Abbott on his bullshit. That tends to be a theme here with this discussion, right? It's Greg Abbott. He's the state's attorney for Texas.
He's the governor.
He's the governor, right?
Yeah.
State's attorney is. See, I don't even want to give him.
Where's my family
bullshit?
unit? Yeah, Ken bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. Where's mom and sis?
I know.
Uh-huh. Let me message him and tell him to get on here. Anyway, but yeah, well, they have a whole cast of characters in Texas, but very important to know that many voters have been purged. So you definitely need to go and check your registration. Another tricky thing that Texas has been doing has been to say, okay, get online to register. Texas early voting begins 17 days before Election Day and ends 4 days before Election Day. That's tricky. Jesus Louise. Here we go. Begins 17 days before Election Day. Unless the 17th day is a national holiday or a weekend, then voting begins on the next business day, right? Carry the 2 minus the 1. Let's do some girl math on that. But I think what's been interesting about Texas is they have said, oh, you can sign up online. And then in tiny letters, it says, but you have to mail it in. Have you been aware of that conversation, Corbin?
I have been. By the way, it's Kim Paxton. I had to look it up.
Ken Paxton.
The Attorney General, who's a piece of shit. And what you're talking about reminds me of a fancy word that we use when we talk about acts of oppression, and it's called political subordination, which means that we don't want you to vote. We don't want you to politically participate.
Wow.
And so it's so interesting. You remember that Trump used to talk about, not used to, he still is, talking about how early voting was something that was undemocratic. Mind you, he is an early voter.
In Florida.
Right? In Florida, yeah. He's cast his ballot already.
He's such
if
garbage.
I'm not mistaken. And so
I believe he has, yes.
It's so interesting to hear about states like Texas where they say, yeah, you can early vote as long as you're looking at byline 3 or if you're looking at asterisk point 2, right? To make sure that you're following the rules correctly. Because they want people to have the literacy to be able to vote appropriately. And who defines appropriate? They do.
I find that to be, and we'll get into obviously the rest of our things we're going to talk about, but we wanted to, of course, start and focus on voting itself. I find it just to be so ironic and awful and icky that to make it this difficult for people, and that is very pointed. It is on purpose, you know. And don't you feel like the last 4 years have been even more so?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say the last 4 years because I feel like I've seen it for, not me personally, but as somebody that studies the history of oppression and the way it connects to things like racial justice and reproductive injustice. It's been since the dawn of democracy that they strategically design things so people can't participate, so that we can economically eliminate people from the process, politically eliminate people from the process. But certainly Trump's legislations, his presence, have just said the quiet parts out loud in ways that we've never heard before.
When you see the two women that he went after, the two election judges, those two, I believe, is it Ruby and that was a woman and her daughter, that they went after. And I mean, those stories really hit my heart. And if you're not aware of it, I mean, they have had some retribution, but as soon as Trump really started banging the drum about not winning the election, he specifically targeted these two Black women and doxed them. They were death threats. It was really, really frightening. And I did find it interesting at the DNC, the man from Georgia, who I believe was an election official as well, a Republican, and he was telling that story about how, they really went after him as well. And his son kind of handed back to him that sign he had made in camp that said, doing the right thing is never the wrong thing. And while they were, being protected by Secret Service, because they had also been doxxed too. So you're right. I mean, it does go back to the dawn of time. And I will say I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine who grew up in Alabama. We both know him. He's in New York City now. And he talked specifically about how they were so not they were, taught about voting, but not how to vote and when to vote, and the importance of these of not just voting president in the presidential election, but every 2 years. And these off. I mean, that's why we're in the trouble we are in right now, because a lot of people didn't show up in 2022.
Yeah, and I just find it so unfortunate and ironic that these are in states that are historically led by Black voters and Black leaders. And so you think Alabama, Georgia, Texas,
Louisiana,
Florida, right? I would say the global South, but of course we're talking in the United States, is that the suppression in the South in particular, people are scared. I remember when Wendy Davis, do you remember Wendy Davis? She ran for governor of Texas, and she gave that long filibuster back in like 2011, 2012. And she almost won the governorship, the second woman governor since Ann Richards. And the amount of suppression that was happening in the state, not just because of her presence, but because it's Texas. They're very scared of Black and brown folks voting. They're very scared about what would happen if nearly the majority, which is what it is in the South right now, when you look at the states, Black and brown folks are nearly the majority. And white people are scared as fuck about what that means for their political power. And
do you know why? I mean, I know you know why, but on several different nuanced ways. One, because they think they're going to be treated the way they have been treated, Black and brown people. Absolutely. They're also taught that dialogue of like, you have got to be the oppressor. If you are not the oppressor, you will be oppressed, which is the absolute I mean, yeah, human nature, somebody's going to be an asshole. Don't get me wrong. No, we're not saying everybody's great, but I mean, they really do feel, they do feel that. And I do feel like since, maybe even like 2010, that's when we really started to feel people so mad about Obama. I believe that's when the Tea Party was formed as well, too, as they've just had this, they've just been banging this drum of like, we have got to be the majority. My friend Krista is here, by the way. Thank you, Krista. They always fight so hard for the Black vote, but little to none is done after. Amen. Amen. Thank you for tuning in on this. Yeah, we agree. Like they love to even tout that out. I mean, Trump was even shouting that out about Black women in the same breath, then busting on VP Harris about, is she Black? Is she Indian? I mean, we don't even have to get into the Black publishing, the what was that?
Oh
The Black,
the journal event, the journalist event,
the Black journalist event. Yeah, that was just. But I mean, we're gonna yeah, exactly, Krista. Yeah, it's not always about racism, but about losing their hierarchy. Their fear is crazy, and they feed each other on it. I mean, they will not let up for a second. I think when someone will maybe, and I feel like we are moving towards that. As we saw people up on the stage, too many white people, in my opinion, at the DNC, way too many white people, but nevertheless, they were coming forward and saying, "Hey, I was wrong. I see what this is about. And I see that this is going to be something that, we do, it's not just about just the white guy being at the top." And that is my drum that I bang, is like, unless you are cis, white, heterosexual, under 40, that is the only person, and that's not going to be as affected if we don't win this election in 2024. Stepping off my soapbox.
Yeah, I just agree, man. Like,
yeah,
100%.
It is. So now we're going to get into, so again, vote.org early calendar. Let me see if I can post these links. And then I'd also love for you to go to, and Corbin, I know you've seen this bluevoterguide.org. I cannot even tell you. That's the second piece I want to jump on real quick, is there's the getting to the polls and then what you do when you get there. And that also is an incredibly confusing time for people as well too, because they're literally like president and then who else, right? I mean, that's why we're in the fucked up situation we are right now, like I said, because people didn't vote in 2022 and now we lost control, right? And so everything in the last 2 years has gotten cop blocked.
No, I love Blue Voter Guide. I also love, and I don't think it's going to apply to everybody, it's Soft Power Vote. And it's primarily for New York State residents. And I just absolutely love them because they're so, and I'll put it in the chat too.
Okay.
They're so focused on progressive and working families agenda. And so, but they do have some federal and some congressional guides. And so I'll add that to the chat as well.
Awesome. Oh, thank you. I think that's really helpful as well too. I mean, I do find the irony in Shady Vance, because that's how I call him now. I mean, that guy cannot help his fucking step in it 24/7. If it wasn't, it's such a dire consequence, it would be deliciously yummy of how stupid that fucking guy is. I know that yeah, Krista. I know that he literally said the other day, "My wife has 3 beautiful children," and we're all like, "What the fuck?" It's like, he just is such a clown. But I mean, these clowns are trying to get in office.
I know we talked about this last time I was on the pod or streaming with you and V, but I just love how the Harris campaign have just said it out loud that these dudes are weird. It's so weird. It's so strange that folks are trying to. I was talking to my partner this morning about IVF, and we were like, what the hell are they thinking going after things like in vitro and talking with folks that in some situations are some of the most anti-abortion supporters in the United States, that they're wanting to have babies, that they say things to people like, "Oh God, if I could have been pregnant," and that they're attacking folks within their own base. It's not only sick, but it's also very confused when you think about a political operation. You're like, what are you talking about? Why are you going after folks that are usually in your own camp?
Well, and so, and your mom says, "Hi, Z. Have you heard the latest leaked video of him? Is that of Shady? Shady, I can't remember. No, I don't know if I have. It's so hard to keep up. We were just talking about Trump at Arlington, which is an absolute fucking travesty.
Yeah.
Will you post a link for us, Z, and we can check that out as well too. But Corbin, could you talk on that? Because I was talking with my mom last night, because I was telling her, I was like, Mommy, just for the love of God, if anybody comes to you and says late term abortion and I'm like, it's not a thing. Fucking stop saying that. I didn't say that to my mom. Well, I said, don't listen if that. So then she's like, well, what's with the IVF? And I said, honestly, I don't understand. And I think it may be because they really want to gatekeep anybody but white people from having, I don't know. What do you think?
I despise the term late term abortion.
Oh my God. I almost wish I hadn't said it, because it's so, it's such a,
we should say it because
this
is shit that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
And something that we don't talk about is how the far right has co-opted this term, late term abortion, or started abusing this idea that there are such things as late term abortions.
Oh my
and it
gosh.
creates this fallacy. It creates this narrative that people are often choosing to have abortions late into their pregnancy, without the advisement of their doctors, without the advisement of their medical providers, without encouraging deep curiosity, deep decision making. And people who have, and I've worked with abortion providers and people who have had abortions for 15 plus years, people, a very, very, very small minority of people realize they're pregnant and decide to have an abortion later into pregnancy. And in most states, they're not allowed to.
That's right.
And so
I mean, before all of this, right?
In New York State, it's up to 24 weeks unless the livelihood of the person who's pregnant is at stake. And so it's a misnomer. It's a fallacy. It's that far right fairy tale that we talked about a year or two ago when I was on the podcast a while back. It's not true. It's a fake thing. And so they use this language as if it's something that's happening. And it just, frankly, it's not. It's something that people like to make up this story because it sounds good. It sounds provocative. And you hear far right folks go as far to talk about abortion after birth, which again is not a thing. It's a made up concept. And I think that we should absolutely, and I really hope that this administration, this campaign, does the unmute, that they make Trump be unmuted during the debate so we can say, when you say crazy shit, we'll call you out. When you say crazy shit, we'll fact check you.
Yes. Oh gosh, I really do too. Sorry, and I was just looking up our far right fairy tales, and I just posted a link to that too. That pairs so nicely like a fine wine and cheese with this conversation and the stuff that Corbin talks about in this episode, which I can't remember how long ago it was. I mean, dude, you called so much of this. This was oh my goodness, it doesn't it was 2020 July 2023. And you'll see in this, I mean, I think you were talking about Heritage Foundation at the time. You called out a lot. You talked about Focus on the Family, Family Research Council, Alliance Defending Freedom, Parents Defending Education, No Left Turn in Education. They have these fucking fun little words that they love to throw around. And I agree as well. I do hope he's unmiked, but I will say, and I think you're probably feeling this as well too, they don't care. The people that we're not worried about to get to the vote, they do not care at this point. If they and right, Z, exactly. It's called murder, you dumbass. And it just and that's the thing too, as somebody who's had, and let me out myself. Are you ready? I've had 4 abortions. Okay. I mean, not recently, because I'm 59. It's been about 20, 30 years. But and I'm still happy as a clam in sand and water about that. But I'm so supportive of families and mothers, and even being a mom to these adopted or these foster Frenchies. I'm over here going, I see how y'all feel. And it is nuts. I'm covered in poop and pee all the time. But even with that, I know that I would have never gotten to about 7 or 8 months pregnant and been like, I'm good. I think I'm good. You know, and it's so offensive to people that and there were several women that spoke at the DNC about their experiences. There was one woman right before the young white girl that had been the assault victim by her stepfather that I wish they had named more. It was a young Black woman talking about her experience with she and her husband. And I felt like she kind of got a little pushed aside because everybody was focusing on, and rightly so, the other story. But she told that just heartbreaking tale about losing her child, and she was kind of far along. And I mean, how offensive is that to these to people who have lost their children? And your sister is in this industry, I guess, for lack of a better word, of being a doula, of seeing these terrible stories. Anyway, I'm ranting. Oof, I get fired up.
It's why I really admire platforms that allow people to talk about their abortions.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've heard abortion stories from the gamut, from people that are like, I didn't want to be pregnant. I was not ready to parent. I'm proud that I had an abortion. There are also folks that talked, and I've met and love and admire, that are like, I very much wanted a pregnancy, and I had to have an abortion.
Yes.
I had to have an abortion later in my pregnancy because my life was at stake.
And this
because
is
the fetus that I was growing was not going to be viable and would not have had breath upon birth, and I would have exposed myself to greater risk. So whatever, I don't have to censor myself on this podcast.
No.
Fuck politicians that expect that they can use that language, expecting that they're going to shame people that have to make, in some cases, the hardest decision that they ever have to make in their lives, and in other cases, decisions that people feel like, you know what, I feel proud of this decision, or it makes the most sense for me, for myself, my own autonomy. It's no one else's right to decide what's best for an individual.
Absolutely.
It's nonsense.
It really is. Krista, listen to this. Who would have ever wanted to have a late term abortion? Krista is a proud mom of 6 gorgeous, amazing children. And Krista has also seen many parts of me because she's my wax professional, if you know what I'm saying. I always love to shout her out. But she said, who do you know that's done that? And I say the same thing when people talk this bullshit. I'm like, give me some examples. She says, I only know one person. It was because the baby was not going to live. Is exactly what you just said, Corbin. It's crazy traumatic mentally and physically. And I think that's the other piece too, that just gets written out of these conversations, because it's a bunch of dusty, crusty old white guys or young white guys talking about things they know nothing about.
Oh, and I just, the words of mentors of mine ring in my ear, who are older leaders in the abortion movement, who say things like, the senator's mistress will always have access to abortion. The senator's daughter will always have access to abortion. And so when we talk about access, they're talking about not having access to abortion for poor folks, for Black and brown women, for people that don't have the privilege to have an abortion on demand when they want it and need it. People with privilege, and these white men's mistresses, their daughters, their wives, they will always have access to abortion. They're trying to deny abortion access to people who are poor, working class, Black and brown, immigrants. The list goes on. So let's call the bullshit for what it is.
And Zuma has a great comment. Privilege equals access. Amen. And guess what? They will also be having IVF. If this is outlawed, you can better goddamn bet that they are going to have access to that as well. And I'll tell you this quick story, and then we'll go on to our other topics. June 22nd of 2022. So we know that was when Dobbs' decision, when that first word dropped, and I was doing an inspection at a very, very foofy golf club clubhouse in a very red area here in Denver. And I'm walking around, and it has this very much feel of old boys club, the leather, the smoky, and then they also had the very dainty little women's golf thing. And I'm walking around, and I'm just reeling from what I had heard that morning. And I look out, and I see these 4 or 5 white guys on the tee, and just being 100% bitch that I am, I did that like dialogue, the fake dialogue, guessing what they were saying. And I was like, well, did you hear about the abortion thing today, Bill? Well, I'm fine. I know my girlfriend can get an abortion. I'm not worried at all. And I literally had this conversation of that back alley will certainly become the phrase that had been shelved for the last 50 years. Back alley abortions, you better goddamn bet. So I'm taking the Lord's name in vain, and I don't care, because my Jesus thinks everybody else is an asshole. So there you go. Okay. Take it away.
No, I mean, I think that I could rant about this subject forever. And I think that the last word I'll have on it is that I'm just shocked that how messy the Trump Vance campaign is to tie in IVF, something that is so deeply personal, something that is about reproductive freedom in a way that their base actually cares about, right? So when you're talking about pro-life folks, I am proudly pro-choice. I am proudly pro-abortion if people are deciding that that's what's best for them, right? But if we're talking about pro-life folks, many pro-life folks that I know are so supportive of IVF. It's what I was saying earlier, that when I talk
Yeah.
to that crowd, oftentimes they're saying that, oh my God, if only I could have a baby. And why would someone choose not to have a baby?
Oh,
It's so
man.
confusing to me, just
Mm-hmm.
on a political stance, why the Trump Vance ticket would say, you know what, we're going to go for IVF, folks. We're going to go. I think people's heart really, what's the right phrase? Really resonated with Tim Walz, right, when he was talking about his
Oh,
experience with IVF and just hearing
yeah.
his story, seeing his kids.
Oh,
People,
gosh.
their heart ached for them because they
Yeah.
relate to their story. I know many
Right.
people my age, I'm 34, who have undergone IVF, who have had issues with becoming pregnant because, they use birth control.
Mm-hmm.
They decided to, thanks to comprehensive sex ed and access to contraception, choose to parent when they were able because they had the autonomy to do so.
Oh
And
God,
so,
can I just say that choose to parent when they are able, sweetie, that is just so delicious in what we want in this world.
yeah. And it used to be, and I'm sorry, it didn't used to be. It is a popular agenda. It is a popular point. If you were to poll the American public on how they felt about allowing people to choose to parent when they want, we would get more votes or support than people choosing between vanilla and chocolate ice cream.
Yeah.
90+% of people agree with that argument. And people, particularly the GOP and the far right, are scared of that argument. They're scared of saying things that are popular and want to divide us on issues that we're not actually divided.
I know. I mean, and just to give an example of that, the border bill. I love how we were able to smack people down constantly of like, yeah, you guys shot that in the foot because Trump told you to do so because it's a talking point for his campaign. So do you see what a puppetry thing that is?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I see Krista talking about how
Yeah.
hard they make it to adopt.
Oh
I was talking
gosh.
I was talking to someone recently about how expensive it was for them to adopt a baby. Over $30,000 for them to adopt one baby. And so we're talking about, again, and it's a very popular argument from the pro-life side of things. Like, just put it up for adoption, put the baby up for adoption. Surely it will have a home. Actually, what you're ensuring is it will go into the system, go into foster care, and then they'll potentially be trapped in the foster care system where they're
Sure.
more likely, I'm a violence preventionist, more likely to experience violence, abuse,
Yeah.
or neglect.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. And do you mind? And babies are literally starving. Exactly. And yes, right, Krista, making it so hard to adopt. So they're acting as if these systems, which by the way, they're not even for funding anyway. Right. So we all know that it is a very pro birth, it's a very, very pro birth nation. Krista is, and she's adopted, and literally they almost didn't allow it because her parents are white and she is black. And Krista, are you in your late 30s, early 40s? Yeah, so she definitely has some sort. And Krista also grew up in more of a well, I don't want to put your business on the highway, Krista. So if you want to say it, kind of, you have a background similar to mine as well too. Foster care is at you're 44. You hot piece of ass. Sorry, you should see her. Foster care is a form of trauma. Oh my God, Z, absolutely. Yeah, Krista grew up in a fundamentalist Christian background that I did as well, which is say it. She's like, say it, give it a name, which is also can be a form of abuse. So we're looking at all these different forms of failure in the system. Could you tell us real quick? We're going to backtrack for a second about your experience because people haven't heard you on the may have not heard you on the podcast. And then also, I know you attended a function a conference recently that I know was very important for you.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I started out, I'm 34 now. I started in the movement when I was 15 years old, much in thanks to family who is in the comments already. My mom's here, but I started as a sexuality educator when I was 15 years old. I'm a survivor of sexual violence and generational sexual violence, and I haven't stopped since. So it's been nearly, I can't do math, almost 20 years now.
So you said 20 years.
Yeah, of doing this
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
And it's transitioned from doing advocacy work, peer education, and then now I work as a director of sexual violence training for the state of New York, and also advising several national organizations in doing their work. I was just 2 weeks ago at the National Sexual Assault Conference talking to members of the CDC, members of Congress about how do we prevent sexual violence at its root causes, thinking about what are the roots of sexual violence, like poverty, what are the roots of sexual violence, like economic instability, the neighborhoods that we live in, the lack of community connection, our inability to connect and use the resources that we need, our distrust of political systems. And so it just makes me so happy to be able to have platforms to talk to folks like you and to folks listening, to think about how do we actually share with people that this is not what people are asking for. They're actually asking for more connection. And there's way more that we have in common that separate us. That sounds like a political talking point because it is, and it's manipulated. And it's true, is that there's far more that we share in common. When I talk about storytelling and talk about ways that people can connect with people that they have far more in common with, we talk about shared values. And maybe this is redundant from conversations we've had in the past, Mia, but when I talk to folks that have political differences, and mom who is here has seen me in these spaces or sometimes nudge me into these spaces, like talk to Uncle so-and-so, that I'll say, like, I know that you care about your family. I know that you care about your daughter. I know that you care about your ability to kind of pay for college, for them to succeed, for them to raise a family in the way that they choose how, that they're happy, that they can make money. Those are things that we agree on. And actually, the politics is far less important to them. Who they vote for is far less important to them. So I think that when we talk about those connections, we're talking about what do we agree on? What do we actually share with one another? And then when we talk about what we have in common, then we can start to talk about where those differences might reside and how we navigate those, I don't know, those incongruences, those areas of tension. But if I were to give advice to folks that are working to have hard conversations, you start with what you share in common. So I think that tangented a bit from like my own story, but also I think it's important as we have this conversation about politics right now, because there's plenty that's happening on a national stage as we think about Vice President Harris, and as we think about supporting candidates that we know need to be in office, and we might share some differences in. Right? We have to talk about those shared values.
The wonderful transition. And I love that, because that was one of the important things we want to cover are these hard conversations now. And when we talked about this before we hit the record button, I was like, well, I'm going to be taking notes, because I am such a whose car are we going to take? Hold my purse and earrings kind of gal, everybody knows it. And so I'm working on it because I'm not as gracious about it. And I rely on friends and, smart people like you to kind of like, okay, but you're so right. I know it even from being involved in animal rescue and things like that. I mean, there just really are very few. Yes, there's shitty people that are all about the money, because it literally everything comes down to money. And we're going to talk about that too, because I want to talk about APAC. Okay, we're going to get into some things that might hurt some people's feelings. But I think we want to talk about these nuanced things. But yes, that's a great starting point of like finding that common thing. Is it your family? Is it the fact that you have had a medical catastrophe in your family and you can't afford that, or it's going to be $30,000 to adopt a baby? Meanwhile, your heart is breaking for seeing people in these systems that are just kind of built to thrive on, and they're also capitalistic, built to thrive on people not really thriving, honestly. thrive on fear. So fear is also a huge thing, Corbin, that I think, even from speaking about sexual violence and sexual assault, when you have these conversations, you can also fear monger. I mean, think about Trump saying, I love how he got asylum like mixed up with asylum for, sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but he thought asylum was like getting out of the insane asylum, like as opposed to people seeking asylum. Like, you dumb fuck. Sorry. You have to laugh at that.
Say it.
Stop. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
but he loved it to say like insane asylum, rapists, like all these people that are coming across the border. So there's this fear mongering really is a huge piece to it. So you're right. If you can start on that piece of like, okay, so, what's scaring you, or asking the hard questions. Have you really heard people that are, I just checked out of the hospital and I got rid of that pesky baby I didn't really want. What? Like asking that, what's the source kind of thing? Do you think those are good ways to start as well too?
They are, and I'm so ADHD, and I got so caught up. I feel like I should be your resident nerd. That when I think about communication, and I got my master's in health communication. Master's degrees don't mean anything, by the way, but I did learn that fear is not a good teacher.
Oof.
It's a good short-term message.
Okay.
This is why people, maybe you remember the DARE campaign, right? Nancy Reagan, the egg yolk, right? Don't say no. The most famous.
I learned it by watching you, Dad. I think that might have been a little earlier, but it still was how we.
The most famous failure of a public health campaign, because fear is not a good teacher. It is a good short-term thought that by doing this, oh, you know what? Like, I don't want to do that. It is not a good long-term teacher. And teachers do a good job when they're helping their student understand, how do you retain this information and organize it into your life? How people actually learn is by learning, what am I learning and how is this going to matter to me as I organize it into my day-to-day practice? And so I've said forever as a sexuality educator, when I started out as one, is that scare tactics don't work. Like, just don't have sex, or if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant, or you might get an STD. People might have a short-term reaction to that information, but it doesn't actually last because they start to poke holes in the argument. Like, what do you mean? That actually doesn't make sense. People have to rationalize things. And so I think of that a lot when I think about politics, is when people try and teach by fear, they fail because it doesn't hold up when it comes to actually rationalizing why that argument matters.
Ooh, that's a whole word. And I am impressed with your master's, but I know what you're saying. Like, I think it's when people think that's the be all end all, as opposed to the practical lived experience too. You combine those two things and then you have some magic going. I agree 100%. I think fear is, it is a short-term type of thing, but when you don't have any practical application to put with that, right? And speaking of the Reagans, eat a dick, both of them. Think about the comparison of Nancy Reagan having that message, and then when you compare that to how the Reagan administration responded to the AIDS crisis, they wouldn't even speak about it. The only time one reporter brought it up, I think he was like called the F word, and then it was not brought up again in any of the what do you call it? When the president's like, speaking to the reporters, like they just laughed about it. They just basically laughed it off for many years until they're like, hey, this is killing everybody.
And there's a reason that dictators, and Trump admires dictators, why he wants to use fear mongering, because we see fear being used as a tool. But I think that what I often have to ground myself in is that people like Mao, people like Stalin, have used fear and they failed. Hitler used fear and it failed with great consequence. I'm not ignorant of that fact, but with great consequence, and fear often fails. And so it's something that I'm just trying to keep at the front of my mind every time I think about assholes and fascists like Trump, and like what we're seeing in nationalist parties across the world in 2024.
I agree. Are you? Let's talk a bit about down ballot too. I keep kind of coming back to this, and then we're going to go to some other feisty little topics too. But I think that is the importance too of you're seeing what Congress, senators, what's happening in our states, obviously, and judges. I mean, this is what is so important about checking out everybody. And again, I'm going to really toot the horn of bluevoterguide.org, because they not only talk about the candidates, but they talk about the ballot issues, and they explain the language, because some of that is such a double negative. If you vote yes, that means no on XYZ, right? But I think what's really important, and we're seeing it just because of what's happening with a lot of this fear mongering, and then a lot of these things that are coming through from these Trump appointed judges, and you do see a lot of people like, well, this happened on Biden's watch. Yes, but it's from judges that Trump appointed or that were voted in 2022 or in 2020. So it's or 2016. So, you really have to pay attention to that as well.
I mean, we can't overstate how important local elections are.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're talking about is, gosh, I mean, like, political critical thinking is really important.
Political critical thinking, yeah.
I don't know. There's probably a much fancier way to say it, or like a much more like communication savvy way to say it. But I heard a similar thing when I was at the National Sexual Assault Conference about someone whose father was a Trump supporter, and they were like, how do I teach my dad to understand that he is not supporting the policies that he thinks he is? He's critiquing Joe Biden for policies that Trump enacted. And
right.
It's something that the political system relies on. They rely on short-term memory. They rely on the lack of critical thinking. And they rely on the fact of something that I kind of preach about how do we teach critical thinking? How do we teach about, actually supporting people and understanding the policies that impact them and how they actually work? Because policy change, and I've been a part of it, takes a hell of a long time.
It does.
And its actual impact, people assume that it's, whoever the gas prices or whoever's in office right now. And the reality is, it's often who was in office 4 years ago or 8 years ago.
Yes.
And we are so short-term in our thinking as an electorate by design. And I'm not blaming the electorate. I'm blaming the politicians. I'm blaming the media. And kind of building that understanding or thinking that relays in some way to how our actual policies are impacting us day to day. So I don't know. I could ramble about this forever, but I think it's just a huge, my mom says, don't forget Congress. Absolutely.
Oh my God.
And I think that just the immediate reward system that we expect from policies, it's not actually the reality. That usually those policies take a whole lot of time to be implemented and for people to actually see the impact. And so it's just a false narrative, just like what we were talking about earlier. They're false narratives, and it doesn't help people in making informed decisions.
No, and I do feel like, and Z, thank you for that. I mean, one, I really encourage people to get to know their local Congress people and like figuring out what they're doing. They are in the trenches. Jason Crow on our end, paying attention to these local people. Joe Neguse, I know he was at DNC as well. Those are my local people. Both of those guys were involved actually in the January. Well, Jason Crow helped a lot of people get safely out of the building because he's a former Army Ranger. Joe Neguse was involved with Jamie Raskin, which if you're not just following Jamie Raskin, just listen to every fucking thing that comes out of that guy's mouth. I mean, he is just such a font of information and so patient. He goes head to head with Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz. And then he, along with Jasmine Crockett, of course, I just protect her at all costs. I mean, I love it. And I actually saw an interesting thing because I've kind of been wondering where Katie Porter had been. She ran for Senate and I know she did lose, but she's still out there and she was doing a little whiteboard takedown of somebody that was a Moms for Liberty gal and really kind of like, hey, your constituents, you have just men who are not even involved in the care of their families per se, that are making that are passing these laws that infect, family. And I'll post a link. Jocelyn Hines, that we went to high school with, sent me that link, and it was really good. So I do suggest that people get in touch with and really start paying attention to what's going on locally as well. So she went old school like Tim Russert or whatever. Yeah, rest in peace. And hey, I just want to remind everybody that today would have been Emmett Till's 83rd birthday. When you think about Emmett Till, we think about way, way, way in the back. And if you don't know who he is the victim of the original white women tears. And he would have been my mother's age. And that woman, Carolyn, whatever her fucking twat was, boost is kicking in. She passed away without getting any, she did not have to pay any consequences for it. So we'd like to say rest in eternal peace for him and his family. And so anyway, I wanted to bring that up too.
Yeah, thank you. I think, one of the things that you said about Katie Porter brings up something that I was wanting to talk about, which is I saw an interview, I don't know, yesterday or the day before, about Katie Porter shoving off a conversation or a protester who was talking about Palestine. And I think that's something that when we were talking about, or I was reading your comments about the DNC, that one of your critiques was around the fact that the DNC is kind of refusing or has ignored the voices of Palestinian voters or Palestinian voices in talking about the election. And so I have been a big Katie Porter fan. I love that she's someone that people can relate to. She has that soccer mom, I drive a minivan mentality, and she's someone who's a teacher. So I respect the hell out of Katie Porter. Okay. And I saw recently an interview where I was really disappointed that she shoved off and just basically ignored a very legitimate town hall question about Palestine.
Wow.
And I'm seeing it.
Do you think that was out of fear?
I think it was out of fear.
Okay.
It could have been out of, I want to give her credit. It could have been out of decorum, or it could have been the fact that the format of the event didn't allow her to respond. So that's very likely, or that's a possibility. Maybe not very likely. But we saw it with Kamala, who, again, I am proud to support. I'm proud to canvass for. I will knock on doors for her. And we all saw, or maybe many of us saw, the interview or the rally that she did when she said, I'm speaking, and shut someone down who was actually talking about Palestinian issues. And the next speech that she gave, she actually addressed and said, I want to listen to you. And it's something different that I don't think many presidential campaigns do, and that they heard and maybe they learned from an interruption that was actually valuable and they needed to address. So
yeah, I did appreciate that.
That's my segue.
Yes. Okay. And I'm ready for that too. So when we talk about this, one thing to give some context to that too, I did do a post that Corbin mentioned, and I thought it was really important to, after coming down off that incredible high, which now that we've had some time to digest it, I also have heard from some content creators, because they allowed 200 content creators that were not media, your traditional media, and there was a little bit of back and forth with them, but I loved that they were there, and they don't have any they have skin in the game, but they're not worried about what their network is going to say. They're going to say what their audience represents and what they represent. But one of the things that I did mention in my post, and that was on, I think it might have been Friday night. I said, here's what I was happy about. And then I said, I was disappointed about the lack of Palestinian voices. I did not say Hamas. I did not say I'm anti-Israel. I have a lot of feelings. I had a lot of feelings about Biden about it as well. Now, and if you are watching this and you want to get feisty, I'm not here for it. Okay. I mean, just please listen to what we're saying, because I've already had somebody step to me quite strongly, unfortunately, and very, and I thought violently, frankly. And I don't know if you felt that way when you read that as well, Corbin. You gave some excellent feedback to it. And I think that's dangerous, because we need to have these conversations and not get knocked into fear of being called an anti-Semite, which is what I was called, or I was also called a Nazi sympathizer. And I was like, wow, to go from me saying what we're going to talk about here, which is to have the voices of Palestinians. And so I do appreciate that that VP Harris was willing to at least modify that. But then she also made some what we thought were fairly problematic CalMax. Oh, I think my internet's wonky. Fairly problematic comments about the war machine. Take it away.
I mean, it's just, I think it's such a slap in the face to ignore the Palestinian cause. In my mind, is to turn a blind eye to one of the most prolonged and painful struggles for freedom in modern history.
Yep.
If people who are following what has happened in Palestine are actually listening and actually following the story, that we have over 40,000 as of today, or as of August 15th, I looked this up before we popped on, 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, 92,000 have been wounded as a result of the ongoing conflict, right? The West Bank and Gaza have been under military siege since 1967, and colonial powers began in Britain in 1917. This has been a long and provoked act of violence and genocide against a group of people. And so for it to be ignored and for you to have someone, I was grateful for the voice of Israeli hostages on that stage. And to ignore Palestinian voices was an intentional act of ignoring voices who are being abused, who are being violated, and who are having their ancestry, their culture erased and actually murdered. And so I just find it unacceptable as a human being. I'm taking the politics aside from it. As a human being, it feels so gross. And when you talk about your Facebook friend, I put friend in quotes, that compares Palestinians to Hamas, it's such a cheap shot, right? To compare people who are of Palestinian heritage to folks who have enacted harm, right? And also, it's just a very shallow argument. I was talking to my partner this morning about Palestinians, about Hamas, and talking about how it's so easy for folks to say, yep, Palestinians are the same as Hamas. And it's like, absolutely no, they are not. And stop coddling people and making them believe that they're synonymous. People are generally smarter than that. And that's what frustrates me. That's what keeps me up. That's what keeps me fighting for some of these issues when I look at these stories and follow the news media that often are erased in our conversation. They're not being talked about in the prominent spaces I want them to be. Is that they're making it seem overcomplicated when it's really not that complicated when it comes to the end of the day.
I really appreciate that. And Corbin, I'm putting in the links that you were kind enough to reference in response to my post the other day, and I'll put that in here as well too, because I am overly about repeating, because personally I need to be told things often. Menopause brain. Your mom, by the way, your mom. They want to confuse people so that they just don't care. And I do agree with that. And I think that certainly, gosh, you have the advantage of there being less of this party line that we were fed. Certainly your moms and my age, we were fed this very, I mean, quite frankly, as if, and I'm sure people are going to get mad at this, as if this land existed with no one in it until 1948. Right. And that's a beautiful, like, little rosy fairy tale. And it's just not true. Christopher Dale's here. Hi, darling. He said that's a great point. It's no longer Muslim versus Judaism. The narrative is one versus the other. It's really all a big land grab, which is sad to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think exactly what you said around 1917, by the way.
Yeah. Talk to me about that. Remind me.
No, and they make it intentionally hard to understand. And I won't claim to be the historian, but I am a philosopher at heart. And so, Jewish people didn't have land. They did not want to, the British did not want to have Jewish folks in British territories, and neither did the Russians. And they said, where can you go? Certainly it was not Western society, right? It was not Britain. It was not Russia. And so they said, here's a piece of land that doesn't matter, not understanding that it was occupied by Palestinian people, right? And so they said,
were the British occupying Palestine before, honey? Is that?
I don't know. I can't remember.
That's okay. Yeah, but they were, but they basically offered up what that wasn't theirs.
Right. But what I do know is they thought that it didn't matter, right? And that was their land to take, even though that there was an occupied territory there already. And so it's such a tricky thing when you think about, or maybe it's not tricky. I don't know. It's pretty clear that it was viewed as an undervalued territory that people could just take over. And so now we have this huge debate over, who has the right to that land. And I would argue, and I would argue similarly for parts of America or the Americas, that people who are indigenous to that land. But we have our own legacy, right? I watch The West Wing to go to sleep often, partially because it's like the good old days in my brain about like what democracy should be. But I remember an episode where they talk about, how dare you talk about territory that is occupied by anybody when America is settled on indigenous land, right? That forced people out.
Busted.
And so,
oh, God, right? Who the fuck do you think you are to have an opinion about this? Oh my gosh.
I think the greater argument, for me at least, is that supporting Palestinian rights, just like abortion access, just like comprehensive sex ed, these are not fringe positions. It's not, or it's a necessary stance for anyone committed to global justice and human dignity. People care about humans. When you show the videos, when you see the pictures, I have not met a single human that I connect with who is not mortified by what they see on Twitter, what they see on the news, if they're actually seeing the news that shows what's happening in that part of the world. Right. So politics often wants us to think that these are fringe positions, that these are far left positions. They're not. They're issues of human decency. Right. They're issues of human dignity that most people care about.
Gotcha. Christopher, thank you for Google it, bitch. And so he did. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And I appreciate that. Yeah, the British controlled Palestine from that just adds into that as well too. I think when you do start to look back and you mentioned about us being overwhelmed earlier when we were talking about even Trump and all that type of thing. I think that there is this flurry of activity, and I think that the Trump administration is just so incredibly adept at creating outrageous thing after outrageous thing, so that you're just like, you've forgotten, you're just inured to it almost, because it's so overwhelming. And so I think as in addition, history is the same kind of thing where you're just like, blah, 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 right? We just want to the empire versus the rebel alliance kind of easy story to put that into, to say right and wrong, yes and no. And, these people are, they're really, really oppressed. And I agree with you. I think you can't ask someone to see that and not have them be absolutely mortified.
No. And I think that Trump made it he made it easier for people to understand their grip on power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Zionism's grip on U.S. foreign policy has been around for a long time. It's deeply entrenched, and it's silenced oppressed people for a long time. I mean, the U.S. sends something like $3.8 billion of military aid to Israel each year. And so when you think about why politicians, why Hollywood, why the media is not standing up against Israeli interests, it's because money's involved. And, there's something that I used to still teach my students. I don't teach as much anymore. I teach a lot of professionals nowadays. But I would tell my students, when thinking about media literacy or political literacy, follow the money. Think about where the money goes.
Always.
So almost $4 billion go to military aid to Israel every year. think about what that means for how people act, for how governments act, for how in entertainment
Universities.
university acts. And then we look at folks like the Squad, Cori Bush, who recently lost her election to another Democrat because she was progressive and spoke out against Israeli or was pro-Palestinian in her approach. And so she lost her election, right?
Right.
To another Democrat.
And I think it's really important for the wording too of pro-Palestine does not mean anti-Semitism, which when you also look up the word Semite, again, you can always get people to like, hi, by the way, that's both. Christopher's got look at Christopher coming in. The U.S. has been playing the same game in Saudi Arabia for generations. Absolutely, all that. It is absolutely the same. Same concept of that too. The problem is conservatism politics. It's right versus left. Agree as well too. And back on the Cori Bush, that was really upsetting. And you know what's upsetting is that they pitted a black man against a black woman in that race. Two Democrats against one another, and that was AIPAC. So AIPAC.
The American Israel Political Action Committee, which is the most powerful and influential foreign political action group that exists in American democracy. And so I don't think that we hear that enough, is that is the most powerful foreign political action committee that influences our election. So we talk about political interference, right? I think of political interference and in 2016, I thought about Putin. I thought about Russia. I never thought about, Israel. I keep saying Palestine because I'm so pro-Palestine, but I never thought about Israeli interference in our elections. But they are supporting, and it doesn't just impact foreign policy. We are seeing that they're interfering in elections that have to do with local legislators. Ilhan Omar just won her race against someone that AIPAC tried to pit her against. And so we're seeing it happen in American politics. And so to think that it's not having interference locally, it's something that we have to check into. I don't want to say that we're being naive. I don't want to say that we're being ignorant, but it requires research. It requires criticality in ways that we're not set up to do. We're not taught to do. And that's by design.
And I would say that if we don't pay attention, then yes, we are being naive, and yes, we are being ignorant. And now you can't unring the bell if you know. And quite frankly, Corbin, that is new to me. AIPAC is new to me because even I was under that like good versus evil. This is all nice over here, and you really need to open your eyes. And we're saying that because we're not being divisive about the election. We're saying it to pay attention.
I think that I've had many conversations in the last couple of months with people that were like, my politics 10 years ago are so different than who I am today. Right?
Yes. And good.
And good. And maybe I talked to you about this, but like, I think that Trump unveiled something around how critical and thoughtful many of us, at least those of us that are politically mindful, need to be. And that, it's why I can say, we can walk and chew gum at the same time when it comes to supporting Kamala Harris. We can walk and chew gum to say, I'm going to do everything I can to get that brilliant woman elected, to president of the United States. And as soon as she's in office, and maybe beforehand, be very critical about her policies about Palestine. I'm going to be very critical about her endorsement of the military-industrial complex. I'm going to be very critical about how she treats people who are incarcerated. That is not the same as supporting and endorsing someone that aims to end democracy, that is a fascist and a nationalist. And I think that, again, kind of like what we're talking about with Zionists, they're equating the fact that, we are critical about Israeli governance and the ways that they're treating Palestinian people as being anti-Semitic. It is not the same, and your oversimplification of that fact is offensive.
And dangerous. And it really is because, oh, I know that's your brother, Christy. That's your brother. And yeah, and I agree, Zalma. Yeah, hold her accountable, and that is, I was thinking in terms of when we were talking about preparing for this conversation, that that we're also talking post-election, but I think it is something that you can really, really keep a hold of right now and not check out as soon as it's done, because this is such an incredibly crucial time, and it's an opportunity for us to get engaged, which we've really never paid attention. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but I really never paid this close attention to. And on Ilhan Omar, and what I appreciated for AOC and Ilhan Omar, that's the importance of this funding and volunteering, because they have their own little cash thing, and they were able to stay. They did a Shirley Chisholm and were able to stay away from being bought. Rest in power for her. Let me bring up a couple comments. Shell Oil and Exxon didn't get rich on the USA reserves. We've always been colonialist. We just hide it better than most other countries. That's my boyfriend, by the way, in case you're all wondering. I love when he says shit like that. We just get so wound up for each other, right? Can you imagine if you, me, your mom, all of us all get in the same room? I think literally things it's just going to the Earth's going to tilt off its axis, and it's going to be insane. I'm just saying. Your mom says that's why these conversations need to be had. Resources need shared, and communities need to be strengthened. And that is, somebody asked me at the gym yesterday. She said, "Are you who's going to be your next guest on the podcast?" And I said, honestly, I am focusing on the election. Like, it just that is, whether that's making phone calls, having conversations like this, having the one-on-one conversations, encouraging people, sharing links over and over and over again, uplifting Black and brown voices. That is what I'm all about. Critical thinking is what extremists have always tried to suppress. It's a historical problem. And yes, Selma, he is so hot. But yeah, that right there, Corbin, we can talk about that. This critical thinking piece.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have 100 thoughts. That's why I can't speak. It's why there's so much education suppression, right? It's why we continue to underfund schools that are located in Black and brown neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods, that we're trying to see Project 2025 gut the education system, get rid of it, move to charter schools, move to private schools that people can't afford. Most people can't afford, right? And so it's so obvious. And I remember, I grew up in Texas for many years, and I remember Bible Belt education. I joke with a lot of my friends and family members about the 3 years of Texas history I got. I just took my partner to the Alamo when I was in Texas back in May. And I gave her the Texas history version of the Alamo, and then the real version of the Alamo as we walked through. And so when you think about these pieces and think about the fact that they try to deny us education access, it's so intentional. And sometimes when you actually recognize it, it begins to be so obvious that they actually don't want people to learn, because, again, that act of political subordination, that word I said earlier, they don't want people to politically participate, because if they understand, that means they can vote. They don't want them to vote. And so how can we suppress people? We can suppress people by diminishing their ability to critically think.
Exactly. And so critically think, absolutely, scare them into it. I know that yesterday in Texas, there was a Latina woman who had said something about early voting, and they raided her house at 6 a.m. She's in her nightgown. They would not let her put anything else on. They were there for 3 hours. I will find that story and post it here, because this is the shit that's really, really, really important for you to hear. This is Nazi shit, y'all, of showing up, of expressing concern about early voting and having them come up. And now I will let you know that they have not approached anyone that's a Republican for anything talking about voting. It's only been Democrats. Fucking Abbott, that's right. And Christopher Dale, yep. USA just desperately trying to suppress critical thinking in the 60s, and look where it got us. And we are back at that again. So we are talking about these stories where they are coming after people. So not only is it suppressing critical thinking, but then physically with closing polling places, with threatening people to go when they speak up, like, hey, this is difficult, with saying that you can't offer water to people in line. I know that having people standing outside of polling places as well too. They are saying now to I think. Oh, Christy, I think you suggested this the other day. That's what it is. Thank you, Z. Texas is corrupt. He has attacked LULAC, and that's what this woman was a part of. I'm not sure what the acronym means, but I know it's for Latin American, and I don't know the rest of it, if anybody else does. And if you have a link to that story, that would be wonderful if you'll post it here. But Christy mentioned the other day, too, when you are going out to vote, to not wear things that are indicative of how you vote. To really kind of keep it under the vest. Christopher, I know when you and I first started talking, I wasn't quite sure how you voted because he's down in Florida, and he's like, I just can't be, as vocal at times about it. He's a little more vocal now, obviously. Yeah, Z, we talked about this already, that almost 1 million voters have been purged. Absolutely. That is just absolutely frightening. So I always engage the folks standing outside of my voting place. You mentioned that as well, too, because Chris was also mentioning some of these folks can seem incredibly nice, but they are there to dissuade voters and to, to make them feel unsure. And that's, again, why I keep banging this drum about bluevoterguide.org, because I really want you to know what's on your ballot. What's on your ballot? Right?
Yeah, it's so hard, and I think it is really hard for us as people trying to be, I don't know, in community with other folks. I remember leaving a restaurant 2 weeks ago, and I live in Buffalo, New York. Used to live in New York City, fairly liberal cities, right?
Right.
And that my wife and I left a restaurant. My wife is a mixed Black woman. And we held the door open for this older couple that was very friendly, oh, what a good young man. And then they got into their trunk. They did. They got into their truck. The trunk said felons for Trump and then Blue Lives Matter. And we laughed. We were like, how can you be a Blue Lives Matter supporter and someone that is a felon for Trump, right? But we also had a laugh with them, or we had a nice moment of connection. And it's that kind of contradiction about how can we be in community with people that we feel so differently than.
Yeah.
And I certainly sympathize for folks in the South, but I will say that for people that live in quote unquote liberal districts like myself, that it's just as divisive or very divisive, not just as divisive, but it's very divisive here too. Eric Adams is the mayor of New York City.
Ooh,
the most quote unquote progressive city
problematic
in the United States, and he's absolutely problematic, absolutely enacting racist laws as a Black man who is the mayor of the biggest city in the United States.
Yeah,
and so it gives me pause when we have these conversations and think about how deep sometimes I think some of these conservative folks are able to be more overt with their policies. But we see the ways in which quote unquote progressive or democratic leaders are able to be so harmful without being as obvious.
Oh my God. I mean, you look at Kristen Sinema, and what's that other chucklehead's name that was the dino? That's Virginia. Oh gosh, you guys call it out for me. I think Andy's watching too. We had the two dinos that really caused so many problems in these last 4 years. Kristen Sinema was out of Arizona, and the other guy is what is his name? Oh, you guys are gonna tell me. I know.
I was thinking about Pennsylvania and John Fetterman.
John Fetterman, yeah. I mean, he also, I've really paid attention to a lot of folks and how they have come out about things. And I just think, whose pocket did you get in? Back on Eric Adams, I know I just listened to a podcast the other day about the preacher out of Brooklyn that got busted. He had his place broken into on a live stream, and it turns out he was also kind of doing dealings with Eric Adams as well too, and pretty garbagey as well. And so Michael B. Hancock, I mean, he was beloved here in Denver, but he also, that you just get people in the pockets. I do want to talk about the Joe Manchin, this motherfucker. Thank you, Andy. Exactly. This motherfucker right here. Oh my God. Jim Jordan, you know, we've got all these, well, he's Republican, but I do want to talk quickly also about the military industrial complex and then the prison industrial complex. And I think we do need to hold them accountable for that's fucking money. Oh my God. It's so much money.
I was on mute, or else you would have heard my deep sigh.
Like I just did. We're muting each other because my fan is so loud, and I'm going to bounce back and forth, or muting ourselves. So yes.
It's such a deep sigh. You know, I was really disappointed. Again, I told you, and I'll repeat again, I will canvass for Kamala. I will vote for Kamala. And I was so disappointed by hearing at the DNC that we're going to have the most lethal and active military force that the world's ever seen. And I'm misquoting, but I'm paraphrasing. But
no, we did talk about it. We had the same. I'll look it up. We had the same. I had such a visceral reaction when she said that so proudly, and the roar of the crowd. So those two things to me were very concerning. But I think that this is the beauty of this critical thinking, is that we know we're going to vote for the Harris Walz campaign.
It's the walk and chew gum at the same time.
It is. There you go.
I understand that we have to pander to the military voter.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we have to pander to big military pisses me the fuck off.
Me too.
Because I saw a tweet or a meme that was like, you know what? Instead of military occupation and money for the military, I would like to be able to see a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to be able to afford college. I would like to be able to pay off my student loans. Right? I'm tired of sending weapons to Israel that are bombing Palestinian schools and mosques.
And hospitals.
I'm tired of sending, in hospitals. I'm tired of sending money to things that actually could cover things that most Americans, and again, that's that vanilla and chocolate ice cream analogy, 90% of people actually support. So that's what I get exhausted by. Most people do not want to be spending the money that we're spending on, $50 million for some antiquated or old submarine that's no longer in action, and that we are only supporting because a part of Virginia actually has a manufacturing warehouse devoted to making parts for it.
Who gives a fuck, right?
That's the reality.
Yeah.
And that you have Congress people that say, like, don't get out of my district. I need my folks to work. And it just is such an antiquated. I understand that we're not trying to take jobs away from people, but why are we funding things that are not actually what American people care about? And so that's what irritates me. And I think when it comes to the prison industrial complex, I have opinions about this for days, but it's the for-profit prisons. It's the fact that we're profiting off of low-collar crimes that should not be having people pay tens of thousands of dollars. When you look at the amount of cost that people put in to be put in prison, the recidivism rates, right? The fact that they're wanting people to go back to prison so that they're paying more money. I often talk to folks, including my mom, including other folks in my lives or in my life, about how much it costs for them to pay for commissary, pay for a phone call.
Oh gosh,
for basic human things that most of us have access to.
They have monetized everything that these people do, and then when you combine that, and I really would like to hold this upcoming administration accountable. Ooh, the boys are going nuts. I would like to hold the upcoming administration accountable for things like that, like expunging records for anything that had to do with marijuana. There were a lot of promises that were made that I didn't see happen. I'd like for that to happen as well too. But then again, when you start to look at that, you start to see how that does fly in with making this money. You start cutting these pipeline. It's the, prison, the what is the play yard to prison pipeline. You're going to cut into people's money. And when it has been privatized, fuck, I mean, it is dangerous. And there was an NPR story yesterday, and it did sort of itemize like a woman whose husband was in prison, so now she's the only breadwinner, and then how expensive it was to for them to buy these phone calls, and then to buy, it was like little chits, you know what I mean, like here's a little now you monetize this, and now you monetize this phone call, and then you monetize this Zoom call, or all these different things, and everything has a price tag to it.
Well, and we'll have another conversation someday about I am a prison abolitionist. I don't think prison should exist.
I appreciate that. I really do. I do.
And it's because I think that people who do harm are hurt. And I think that people that do harm don't get the care that they need. I think that there's a very small population of us that are sociopaths or psychopaths who need very intense treatment for those conditions. But if you think about most folks that you know that might be in prison, if you actually track what led them to be in the place that they are, it's usually hurt. It's usually trauma, right? That led them into those conditions. And so I feel like the American government and that our tax dollars would be well better spent supporting people and making sure that we prevent those conditions from occurring in the first place, versus actually paying for the care that they need in these conditions that guarantee violence happens. I spoke to a prison abolitionist that talked about the fact that we imprison people is a guarantee that that person will re-experience or experience violence. And I 100% agree.
Absolutely. You look at everything, and we're great comments, by the way, and your mom's posting some wonderful links, and I'm going to repost those over to YouTube as well. So we've got the same kind of stream of information going too. But when you look at the lack of, and the demonization and the joke that it can be about mental wellness, you think about the words that people use that, crazy, insane, all these different things, that people are putting out there to just make it about this otherism of mental wellness, right? And then we talked about the system, the foster care system as well. It is literally from birth that people can be in this, conditioned, groomed, whatever you want to say, to lead to that. But then it is always about the money. It's always about the fucking money.
Well, and there are very public comments about, the fact that they don't want to punish people so hard that they are in prison for life, because if they're in prison for life, then that means that they can't make more money off of them when they get out of prison and that are likely to violate their parole and be put back in prison and have processing fees, have other fees associated, where prison industrial complex makes more money. And it's just like politics. It's such a gross example about the way that our governance actually works. It's about profit. And I think that, again, if you were to poll people, that is something that we find gross. It's something that I am not a Bernie Sanders stan. But one thing that he stands against is for-profit elections and against the idea of PACs, political action committees, or
political action committee. I appreciate what he had to say at the DNC. I actually did. I think I love that he's gotten out of the way a little bit.
I agree.
It feels like and so two things can be true at once as well. We can walk and talk and chew gum and say we don't like the garbagey things he's done in the past to sort of divide people. Some great comments, and here's Andy. It's so nice to see you, by the way. I actually would like to have a session like this and have Andy be our ancillary fourth of the Holy Trinity, because she always has amazing comments as well too. She says we are a generation or two away before we stop the military mythology. I also want to bring up, if you've never seen the documentary 13th, is incredible. I could not watch When They See Us, but I do love that the Exonerated Five. I want to be very careful when I say the Exonerated Five rather than their original title. Was absolutely beautiful. so much information to share about the prison industrial complex. And I think it is wonderful that we can now be these people to be empowered and empower others to say, question this shit. Right? You know, question.
Yeah. I think there's a misnomer that by being critical thinkers and by asking questions, that means that we're being antagonistic, and it means that we're not
or
leaning
contrarian.
Or contrarian. Like, I am so energized. I am so joyful by what I'm seeing happening, nationally, locally. I'm seeing neighborhood level change happening because of the current conversation.
Yeah.
And that still means that I can be critical.
Yeah.
And actually, it's my right to be critical, whether it be a constitutional right or a human right. Who gets to decide? Like, I will break laws I have before to express my opinion, to express my viewpoint.
Yeah.
And so, I've had great folks in my networks before that have said laws are not always what's politically right. And we've seen folks in Russia, we've seen folks in different parts of the world, including in the US, that have expressed human rights that are not legal. And so, like, legal does not always mean what's fair and what's just.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for such a great reminder for people too. That's critical thinking as well too. Instead of being legalistic and saying, well, it just is what it is. It is. I mean, that's why people go into politics, is they've either had a child killed, they've had, these things, these tragedies happen to them, or they've seen their community decimated.
Yeah.
And they're like, I want to make
it was change. Once illegal for women to vote, for Black people to vote. I mean, like, we only have.
I'm laughing because it's like, yeah, that was illegal too, folks.
And not, 1964 was not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, so illegal does not mean bad, and discourse is not always dissent. And so I think it's so important for us to have these conversations.
Dude, somebody needs to follow you and just write down all these little bon mots that drop out of your face. And I'm here. Discourse is not dissent. I absolutely love that. I mean, listen, tattoos were illegal in New York City back in the day. So there you go. It was illegal to buy booze here in Colorado on Sundays. Andy says, and then we're going to wrap this up. Corbin, have you read Houses of Healing, A Prisoner's Guide to Inner Peace by Robin Kasajaran, Emotional Literacy? Okay.
I have not read, but I have heard of that thinker. So
you've heard of
but
that,
I'll have to check it out.
Okay.
Thanks.
I love that. Thanks, that. Andy. And Andy says, how they responded to Gus, and then your mom responds saying, exactly. They showed who they were. Again, they have privilege to afford access. And I do want to touch on that as well too. What a coming out of nowhere. I mean, I think I don't want to say Republicans, I want to say MAGA has got to be like, fuck me running every time these things keep coming up of like Gus Walls comes on screen and they're making fun of them. And then we are able to parlay that into saying, look at what you are doing. Look how you're reacting. And even when I posted it, I was unintentionally careful to not say, because I could tell that he was Spectrum. I just was more like, oh my gosh, I could see that kid. I just saw that heart on that kid. And then I saw that family and I thought, that just was so beautiful. And I love that the Democratic Party is now not reacting as a bully, but reacting as a like, all right, enough already. I do love that, hon. How do you feel about that?
I am so happy to see the Democratic Party and the media be over the bullshit, be over the fact that we have to be this is such a meme moment, but like demure, right? Like very
very demure,
subtle.
very what is it? Very demure,
very mindful,
I love that guy.
very
mindful.
But no, we don't. We can call people out on their bullshit.
Yeah,
that is bullshit.
Yeah,
the way that you're treating people. Like, we're going to call that out and we're going to call you fucking weird for saying it.
Oh,
because
God,
it is. I mean, like, how weird is it to look at, regardless of that person's ability status, that was a son having a moment with his father. right? R.I.P. demure behavior. Thank you. But like, regardless of his ability status, and it shouldn't actually matter, right?
Yeah, that's
Like,
right. And that was the point that I loved. It
I
like,
was
oh,
so
you had to
touched.
feel badly once you found out. Why would
Yeah.
you not just feel badly because you are making fun of someone's emotion?
I was so touched seeing a young man, as someone who teaches about sexual violence and masculinity, seeing a young man just like have vulnerability and show emotion
Mhm.
about his father. It was such a great example of the fact that men have emotions, men can feel and connect with their fathers in really lovely and beautiful ways. And I almost resent the fact that it has been couched into the fact that this young man is neurodivergent. I'm glad for the platform and celebration of the fact that that's his identity, or that's who he is. That's how his brain operates. But also, it shouldn't have to be that way. I mean, like, exactly, Andy. Real men feel, and that's not something that should be shied away from.
Yeah, that's
And
Andy's whole family, by the way. She's the has her last name is Lyons, so she has the Lions Den and 2 sons, and then her husband Chet, and they that is their theme at their house for sure. But what I will say, I love that people did pivot out of. I saw a lot of posts, and maybe that's just my feed of why did you have to only be okay with it once you found out where he was on the spectrum. So I do see people pushing back on that as well and taking that extra step of critical thinking. And and I had to do it for myself. I'm appreciating it.
I think I often talk about critical thinking and emotional intelligence, and that we can think about the cognition and the emotionality. And so sometimes as a teacher, I'll say, like, what made you think that way? Or I'll say, how do you feel about that? How do you feel when someone says that you're less of a man for crying? Or critical thinking is, what do you think about people who say that you're less of a man for crying? Those are 2 different things. But it's such a great example, and to see Republicans or MAGA or Ann Coulter, fuck Ann Coulter. I've been over her for 2 decades, and I'm only 34. I've been seeing her since I was 11 years old, and I'm tired, I'm tired of them trying to co-opt, especially right now, co-opt weirdness and to say that emotions are being weird. No, what's weird is JD Vance's behavior. What's weird are oh God, who's our Speaker of the House right now? Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson talking to his son about what pornography they both watch. That's
God, I haven't heard that.
That's weird. They keep each other accountable theoretically. I've read this. Who knows if it's true? They keep each other accountable about what porn they both watch by discussing it. That is weird.
That's the hill you're going to die on. Yeah. A son dying is weird, but you've got to like
his father giving a speech at the Democratic National Convention. That's not weird.
No.
And how dare you for acting like expressing emotion is weirdness?
Yeah.
And so they're just trying to play into, and it's in the playbook. It's in the 2025 playbook.
I was just
playing into gender norms is a way that they feel like they can win. They want to make America great again by meaning men act stoic, they're unemotional, they don't feel. Only women feel, and they belong in the kitchen, right?
Yeah. It really
and that's why I love the message of we're not going back, because that's not what most people feel. That's not what they resonate with. It's toxic masculinity, as Andy's saying, and most men don't believe that.
They really don't. They don't, but I think what we're on the verge of is that 2 things can be true at once, and then men actually speaking up as opposed to women doing all the heavy lifting. And I really want, and we're gonna end on this because I can tell the dogs are literally tearing the house down downstairs. Anybody want a Frenchie?
My battery's going out, so it's perfect.
yeah. So we're in good timing. But I would like to encourage. Hold on, I got to turn my little light. I would like to encourage people that I don't want it just the women doing the heavy lifting. Talking to Corbin is. I don't want Corbin to be the exception. I want you to be the norm of men having these conversations and not having it be women having to say, hey, can you speak up too? Because silence can be complicit. And so as good as men can be, I want you to join along, and we want to bring you along as well too. So please, and I love that there are these different factions of people for Harris, which I think is wonderful. White men for Harris, black men for Harris, cat ladies for Harris, all these different things. I do feel like I want this kind of discourse to be the norm. Christopher's in on it too, right? Your dad is in on it. Andy's husband, Andy's sons are in on that too. So please, the more the merrier. And you're welcome on that. Yeah, tampon tin worked out great. Same thing. Nice try, motherfuckers. Now you're just weird for being mad about tampons. I love that even before Walls was the VP pick, that he was on. It might have even been Fox saying, "Oh yeah, oh gosh, oh what a monster! I got luncheons in schools and tampons, and oh gosh, I'm such a horrible person." I mean, he really flipped the script on that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a popular opinion. And if I can do a little shameless self plug,
yes, please. I want to close out with talking about your fucking awesomeness.
Yeah, no, I'm starting an independent project around positive masculinity and healthy relationships, and trying to do listening sessions with people that are raising with or who are men and boys, to talk about how we need more models of healthy masculinity and positive masculinity, and how can we build programs to allow spaces for that to exist in the world. So
thank you.
It's something that I'm happy to share, and share my contact information. We're starting to do research to think about how we can learn and hopefully replicate efforts, programming, webinars, training series, guidebooks, whatever it might be that allows for more conversations for men. Because what strikes me from some of these conversations that we're just having about Gus, for example, is that we are so in need of examples of positive masculinity. And clearly it's lacking from our conversations. So yeah, I would love to have more conversations with you, Mia, or with any folks listening.
Yeah, Andy's saying that Andy Grant is on that. But and I appreciate that. And I think what I know that you can bring to the table too is having 20, probably more, but 20 years concertedly of being in this work. I know you can also probably speak to the pushback and the shit that you've gotten, and you can really help people to navigate that as well too. Because I will say, we had a situation where somebody that we all went to high school was kind of talking shit, and Christopher was defending me. And then we had the conversation where then he turned and was like, and hey, by the way, knock that shit off. Like, so not being about that the women of like having it be parlayed into, oh, she's so mouthy and she's so opinionated and this and that. But hey, stop it. Because I know it from being a woman in construction. And I have to tell people, if I have men with me, like, please don't say anything, because the minute you open your mouth, they're not going to hear me. And I fucking seen it in person. I've seen literally the veil come over their eyes, and they turn and look at the man and go, oh, I can hear so much better now. Motherfucker. Right. And that is very practiced, and it's very encouraged in society. And so I do think the more that men are just saying, one, supporting women when they're talking, but two, also speaking up so that we don't have to do all that heavy lifting. And I'm saying that as a white woman, let alone what Black and brown women are doing.
And you shouldn't have to, and no individual should have to.
No,
it should be cultural, right?
Yeah,
it shouldn't just be one Corbin. It shouldn't just be one Mia.
That's
it should be a culture of people that say, knock that shit off.
Yeah,
that's not okay.
Yeah, and I think that the weird thing is the start of that. I think the weird thing is literally like, dude, that's weird.
Yeah.
Somebody said, and
we should keep the weird trope going.
I do too. I think it's super fun, and I think it's not. I don't think it's violent at all. I think it's just calling it out. And I also think somebody said when they apparently fucking Shady Vance said something else about people not having kids that they shouldn't be teaching. That was another one that came up. And somebody said he has got some kind of fertility kink. Like, what the fuck, dude?
I'm shocked. I'd be shocked.
Right? I know, like, God damn, like, you've got calm down, sir. Like, I think he found these things that he thought were talking points, his whole diet Mountain Dew thing, you know what I mean? Like, so I think calling these things out so we can pay attention. And I will say, one thing that I did do that I did vote undecided in the primary.
Yeah,
I was like, you know what? Because it was when Biden was still there, and I did not agree about Biden's. It was based on Biden's Palestine policies. Quite frankly, that was my way to say it. But now, vote often. Just kidding. I love to say that. Vote early, vote often, just to mess with people. But you do need to vote and have those tough conversations. So, Corbin, after we're done, will you post your links of where you'd like people to get in touch with you? Because I think that what you're doing is so important. And I do appreciate that this has inspired you to know that this work needs to be done.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. Well, we are off our bullshit for the time being. And we will see you all again soon. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks so much, Mia. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, darling. Thank you for being on the show. We love it.